fascinating macro development in U.S. foreign policy that I'm so curious about. Hold on. I'm sure you've thought about this.
First and foremost, by the way, speaking as your northern neighbor, congratulations on the election results. I mean, we're all pretty happy about that.
Yeah, we'll see. Just don't congratulate us yet, okay? We voted him out of office. It doesn't mean we've removed him from office.
Well, you have a really curious system there. You know, you've got like 2.5 months between the election and the actual taking of office by the incumbent.
Yeah, actually,
why does it take so long?
I'm not actually sure. I was actually curious if that was the case with other countries as well.
No, not at all.
Do you guys in Canada, do they just leave afterwards, or?
Pretty well, yeah. Once the election is held, it might be a really small sort of handover phase, but it sure as hell isn't 2.5 months.
Huh. Yeah, that's really weird. I don't know why that is the case in the U.S. I'm not sure. Because it seems like, are you familiar with the term lame duck?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it would contribute to that quite a bit. They're like, oh, well, I'm here for a few more months, but I'm out anyway. So
yeah. The problem is, though, the guy that just lost isn't going to be very lame for the next 2 months. He's going to do all kinds. I mean, we're already seeing it, right? In terms of people he's firing. It just seems like he just took his old role as the firer, just to fire everybody in sight.
Yeah, maybe. Hopefully that's him just being power tripping and not setting up for any kind of crazy stuff. But yeah, I guess we'll see. Okay, before we start, do you want to introduce yourself so that people have an idea of who you are and what we generally talk about?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Phil Gurski. I am Canadian. I spent more than 3 decades in security intelligence in my country, working for the Canadian counterparts of the National Security Agency and kind of like an FBI-CIA hybrid called CSIS, Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Kind of a counterterrorism guy. I've written 5 books on counterterrorism around the world in the past 5 years, and still remain active monitoring, kind of what's happening on the terrorism front, who's who in the zoo, who's doing what, and what kind of progress, if any, that we're making so far.
Yeah, so I know that you reached out to me to talk. There are 2 major questions that I have regarding U.S. foreign policy. I don't know if you want to start, or if you want me to start, or how you want to do it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Minor one and a major one. Do you want the major one first or the minor one first?
Let's get the big one out of the way right away.
Big one out of the way first. Something that I am so intensely curious about. I need to remember names so that I sound more credible instead of saying I heard from this, but I've watched a lot of these little conferences or whatever. One major thing that seems to be different now, that has never been the case in the stage of like world politics, is the United States is like refining and drilling so much oil now, because we've had access to, I think it's the shale oil or whatever, through fracking or whatever. We are making so much more that I've heard some people say that the Middle East is becoming an area of where it might be of somewhat of a geopolitically important area for whatever reasons related to Russia or China. But in terms of like securing oil or having a good relationship with like OPEC or whatever, that the US might not be as concerned about that anymore. That if Iran wants to go over and drone strike some Saudi Arabia refineries or whatever, as may or may not have happened in the past, that the US just doesn't actually care that much. And that this might herald like some like new direction in US foreign policy, where because we have so much energy independence at the moment, we have a less of a vested interest in parts of the Middle East or the greater Middle East region. What do you think about that in general? Do you think that's hogwash or what? I'm curious.
Well, I definitely have heard that, because of things like fracking and advanced technologies and getting at oil that wasn't, economical to get in the past, that you guys are doing really, really well on the oil front. And we're doing the same thing here in Canada, right? Although the problem with ours is are mostly trapped in what are called oil sands, and it's very expensive to get out of the ground, unlike fracking. So you have an advantage right there. And you're absolutely right. I mean, no one really would give a rat's ass about the Middle East if it had not been for oil. You think back to, I'm old enough to remember the oil shock of the 70s and the fact that we had to really, kowtow to the Saudis and everybody else. And so we paid them attention, because prior to that, most people couldn't find it on a map and simply didn't care. It just wasn't an important part of the world. And so if they get to a point where nobody needs the oil that they're pulling out of the ground, with the exception of maybe some Central Asian nations, I'm not sure what the situation in Europe is like. They don't have a lot of oil in Europe, although there's massive finds off the coast of Turkey and stuff like that, off Greece as well. But that may take time to develop. But the fact remains is that we care about what's happening there, largely because the fact that we needed a product that they had in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. And that has now changed. And the problem is, Stephen, is that the relationship that especially your country and some others that created with Saudi Arabia beginning in the 70s, because of the fact that they could basically pump this stuff out of the ground for like a nickel a barrel, we basically bent over and took it from the Saudis, which allowed them to make a gazillion dollars and use that money to spread their intolerant, hateful version of Islam. We call it Wahhabist Islam, which is in fact sort of the fountainhead for a lot of modern Islamist extremism. You know, people see the Saudis are our friends and allies. They're the guys that caused this in the first place. And they wouldn't have done that had they not had a gazillion dollars in the bank that they could use to send preachers and material around the world that they got from us because we bought their oil. So I would actually welcome a day in which the Middle East went back to just being another part of the planet that wasn't occupying all of our attention and that we didn't pay an inordinate amount of time and money for it. I mean, that would be a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we're just kind of curious generally. The guy that I'm citing, and I know that he's controversial, and I need to be careful especially because my knowledge of foreign policy can be limited, so it's very easy for me to get swayed dramatically by one person, is, I don't know if you ever heard the name Peter Zilhan.
No, actually, I haven't.
Okay.
And I do follow this stuff kind of closely, so I'm curious why I haven't heard of that.
Guy, I think he's more like economics plus geopolitics, not just,
Okay.
Zihan, maybe I might have pronounced it right. Zeihan, Zihan, I don't know.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, gotcha.
Sounds German, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
But I mean, the bottom line is that, the Middle East isn't going to, drop to, through the center of the earth tomorrow kind of thing.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But I do think that we have expended an awful lot of blood and treasure in wars and doing things because we needed that resource. And if in part because of the American surplus in oil and in part because of the greening of technology and the greening of energy, these guys are simply, nobody cares anymore. I can see that only being a good thing, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. And then, so my second question is everything is always the most extreme that you've ever seen in your life because everybody says it's the most important election ever, this blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So I'm still kind of sort of young, middle-aged, whatever, 31. This is going to be the most...
Oh, God, you're young.
Yeah. This is going to be the most whiplash I've ever had from one administration to the next. We're going from what it seems to be one of the most borderline authoritarian kind of sort of fascist administrations I've ever seen in my life to what is arguably going to be one of the most progressive agendas that we've ever had, hopefully in terms of foreign policy as well. How do you ever cut a deal with the United States relating to anything foreign policy-wise when this type of whiplash can come every 4 years? I'm thinking especially in regards to things like the Iranian nuclear agreement or in regards to how we treat North Korea.
Well, you raise a very good question, right? Because a lot of these deals and relationships that we create depend on the fact that they're going to be reliable in nature. And so when you're dealing with the North Koreans or the Iranians or the Chinese or the Russians or whatever, you need people in place, in power, in the administration who aren't going to change their minds every 5 minutes like the former president did, and that really basically throw a horseshoe into this and no one knows what's coming next. So that's one thing, in fact, that I think is you're going to see an incredibly better managed system, and that is your country's foreign policy relationship with its allies, including Canada, including NATO, including the European Union, because there's going to be the expectation that at least for the next 4 years that there'll be a consistency there. Whereas with the previous guy, the consistency lasted 5 minutes until he tweeted something asinine and he changed his mind yet again. Now, if in 4 years' time something else happens and you get what you're calling another whiplash to another candidate that is equally, well, hopefully no one's as equally as bad as the guy that's getting out of office, but a candidate that is maybe a little less dependable or a little less predictable, yeah, that does cause a problem. I mean, look, governments change all the time. I mean, we have gone between conservative and liberal in Canada for the past 20 or 30 years. But there has been more or less a consistency in how we, handle our foreign policy. Even if there are differences in philosophy between those two political parties, you don't have that wide swing between, something completely on one end of the spectrum, something on the other end of the spectrum. I'm looking very forward, I think, to the Biden administration. I think from what I've seen so far, and I'm certainly not an expert in U.S. politics, that there is a sanity, but maybe given what we've seen over the last 4 years, anything looks better. But I do think there are a lot of very positive points that we can look forward to in terms of at least a stability in moving forward on a multilateral basis. At least we're going to have this notion that when the president says something, he's not going to change his mind 5 minutes later. We can work with that, even if there are disagreements. So I think from that perspective, that's a very good thing.
At least within the administration, yeah. Hopefully, though, it doesn't. I guess the only fear now is that I guess when you see something as historic as like the Iranian nuclear agreement just undone with the stroke of a pen, I wonder going forward if that hurts our ability to negotiate. And then it feels like, I guess since World War II, it feels like, and man, my lack of history knowledge might be showing, it feels like this is the first time it felt like America was taking a step back from kind of being a world leader, where we didn't want as much to do with any allies. We didn't care as much about the UN. We didn't care as much about NATO. Where the U.S. was really abdicating a lot of ground. We're like, screw these trade deals, screw this, these big multilateral agreements or whatever. You've got people like Angela Merkel, I think, saying, maybe it's time for the EU to look past the U.S. for leadership.
They've been saying that for years now. But I think with the really concerning point for those of us, in Canada, in NATO, and the European Union, was not just the fact that we were being dismissed and that, long-standing relationships were being thrown under the bus on a daily basis. I mean, we can deal with that because, administrations change. But it was the opposite side of that coin, and then the people that were being embraced, like Putin, like Erdogan in Turkey, like Xi Jinping in China, like, the North Koreans. It was bad enough that these, as you said, we've had 75 years of these relationships in the post-World War II world, and we've had our disagreements, but for the most part, we've gotten along. We've worked together. That's bad enough. Then to have the guy that chucked you under the bus, then to hop in bed with dictators and people that are slaughtering, in the case of Xi Jinping and his policy in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs and in Tibet, like that to me is like that's sort of, you threw us under the bus and then you reversed the bus and drove over us again by the fact that you completely rejected what we all thought was the one way forward, or probably the best of, or I don't know, maybe not the best, but a pretty damn good way forward. And you basically decided to throw your lot in with a bunch of people that are completely antithetical to everything we've been working for the past 75 years. That really, really hurt.
Do you think when looking at Trump's foreign policy decisions, this is a very kind of personal opinion question, do you see more malevolence or stupidity? I'm just curious.
I would say probably more the latter, in the sense that, I just don't think he's a very bright man. I don't think he's the kind of guy that spent his life worrying about these issues. Let's face it, when you look at presidents or prime ministers, whatever, most of them, a lot of them are lawyers, or, they've come up and they actually know something. Like they've actually studied something. This guy was an entertainer right from day one. He didn't have any foreign policy experience. He didn't have any domestic policy experience. He didn't have any experience at anything aside from, running, starring in shitty television shows. And all of a sudden now he's the president of the United States. So why would you expect someone like that to have, wise, deeply considered decisions? No, because he's incapable of doing it. Was it malevolent? Possibly, because he just seems to be a very malevolent kind of guy. Like, piss him off once and that's the end of it kind of thing. Look at people he's fired, look at the decisions that he's made. He holds a grudge forever, right? If you don't agree with what he says, then you're toast. So I think there probably was a malevolence to it, but I would say more it's just that he had no idea what he was doing. And because he fired advisors, like twice a week he'd fire somebody, and he'd only bring in people that would say things that he wanted to hear. Whereas what you wanted advisors is someone say, what, Mr. President, you're wrong. We've looked at this, and this is the best way forward. I know you don't like it, but we've got some smart people that are looking at this. And frankly, sir, we don't think you should do what you're doing. If no one tells you that, and you go ahead with your gut feeling, which is based on nothing, why are you surprised that you have these foreign policy and domestic policy decisions you have over the last 4 years? It just stands to reason, right?
Yeah. That's always how it comes off to me. There's always, there are people on both sides where there are people on the right that think that Trump is like a very ingenious political figure and he's maneuvered everything exactly. There are people on the left that think that Trump has undermined democracy in a very specific, very pointed way with a lot of, intentionality in mind. But yeah, I see him as he just kind of like bumbles around and is a little bit of a selfish fuck.
That's how it strikes me. And I'm not, I'm not an expert on U.S. Foreign policy, U.S. domestic policy, but as an interested observer, it just seems to me that that's what's dictating the types of things that he does.
Okay, those are the two huge questions I had.
Not too bad. I thought it'd be worse than that.
Yeah, no, just kind of curious about. So we believe it or not, you do believe it. You're in Canada. It's probably much the same. Foreign policy, just in this part of the world, is not really something that people talk about or care about much, regardless of what's going on. Save like for major terrorist attacks. Yeah. Yep.
No, you're absolutely right. Elections are run on domestic policy, and the fact remains is that had it not been for COVID, and the economy had been doing better in your country, and you didn't have a million cases and 100,000 deaths, whatever it is, he probably would have been reelected. It was agonizingly close, right? Which those of us outside are like, how is this even possible that this election is going down to the wire? Like, it shouldn't have been, we should have had like a Nixon moment in '72, where what did he win, like 50 out of the 51 states or something? The fact that it was like 50-50 is just mind-boggling. But it's because, thankfully, well, this is a terrible thing to say, but the Bass Ackwards approach to COVID from the day one is probably one of the reasons why he lost a lot of his support. But all politics is local, as they say. No one cares what happens to Tajikistan. You've got professionals to worry about that, and sometimes but your average American or Canadian can't find Tajikistan on a map.
Sure.
And they're not casting a vote based on Tajik politics or
sure.
What should we do about Azerbaijan and Armenia and the recent war over Nagorno-Karabakh? No, that doesn't win you votes. Is there a chicken in my pot? Can my kids go to school? Or is it safe to walk down the street? That's what decides who you vote for.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think I was going to mention in terms of the election being close, one thing that I do think is pretty ahistoric is the partisan divide has just gotten unbelievable. I should look it up, but I'm pretty sure Trump's approval rating is still higher than 90% among Republicans. The partisan divide right now in the United States is just unbelievable.
When you're seeing that now, even like the fact that he's lost, and then no one in the Republican Party is saying anything against him, right? They're going along with all these lies about voter fraud and fake ballots and stuff being burned and all. I mean, guys, maybe, and that's for internal political or party reasons. Maybe I don't really understand that, but yeah, the partisanship is actually quite frightening. I mean, this is a time where you want this sort of non-partisanship. Now we have it here in Canada. I'm not going to lie to you. I just don't see it as stark and as divisive up here as I see it in your country, and that's not good going forward. So we'll see what happens with this presidency. We'll see how it goes. Will Biden live long enough for a second term? Well, we'll find out in 4 years' time, I suppose. But will this continue into the 2024 election?
Yeah.
I hope not, because there are a lot of things that we're worried about right now, and they need bipartisan support. I mean, my understanding is that the Senate's going to remain in Republican control. Is that true?
We don't know.
It's pretty close, right?
They have 50 seats right now. You need 50 plus a vice president to have a majority. Yeah. So there's going to be 2 re-elections in Georgia.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah,
which is historically, I'm pretty sure, a red state, but went blue, and there's going to be a lot of money and a lot of fighting going on in that state. During the next. But
if the Senate remains with the Republicans, I mean, the way your system works down there is they can basically veto anything the president wants to do, right? I mean, so again, that partisan nature of politics really, it precludes the possibility that both parties can get together and work together to solve really big problems, because that's what you need. You need that joint effort.
Yeah, I don't know it's hard to blame the politicians. I don't know where the blame lies, because there are when it comes to cultural issues or political issues, you have this circular feedback, where there's a thing going on over here and you want to blame it, but it's also because of a thing going on over here. So like, if we look at the Republicans, right? Why aren't more Republicans calling out Trump for the not conceding the election, for all these claims of voter fraud, for having anything to do with like people like Rudy Giuliani? Like, why aren't they calling? But it's like, Trump is still massively popular in the Republican Party. If a Republican lawmaker steps up and calls out Trump, well, he's just going to get voted out. People aren't going to support him anymore. And then where does that get them at the end of the day? Like, at the end of the day, your job as a politician should be to be loyal to your constituents. And if your constituents are still massively supporting the president, I don't know if, as much as I want to say, like, you guys should take a moral stand, like, I mean, I kind of understand, like, I wouldn't want to speak out against the president if he's got a massive leader or a massive approval in my party, and I'm going to lose my seat over. Like, what's the point? What do I gain from doing that?
No, I think you make a good point, and party loyalty is important. I mean, like, here in Canada, parties vote along with their parties. If you vote against your party, you're basically kicked out. You do have a bit more, I think, wiggle room in the States. You do see Democrats voting for Republican measures and vice versa. Maybe not now under this the last administration, but I get that. But like I said, there's so many overarching challenges that we're faced with right now, from global warming on down, that it'd be nice just to see these guys get together and actually work towards a common solution, as opposed to keep chucking shit at each other every second day.
Yeah, I hope so. The gridlock. Yeah. I mean, like, our system is supposed to be slow, but I don't think it's supposed to be this slow. I don't think it's supposed to be impossible to get anything done. And the way that our bicameral legislature works is just unbelievable right now. Yeah.
Well, and the hypocrisy over the appointment of a Supreme Court judge, right? Here's the same party who, under Obama's waning days, when he tried to appoint a judge, said, well, we can't do it now because there's an election coming up. You had the exact same scenario 4 years later. And the exact same party says, oh, well, we can do whatever we want now. It doesn't matter if there's an election coming up. So, I mean, people shake their heads and say, like, how could you have said that 4 years ago? And it's a complete 180. Like, how did you do that?
Over the past like year or two, I've been blackpilled so hard on how like electoral politics and stuff work. Like I understand. I feel like I understand all of it. Like you're going to say whatever you need to do to make your voters happy.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, that's it. And then your job at the end of the day is to secure political power. I wish the betting markets would have been open. I'm starting to bet more on electoral stuff because I think if you're in the business of making calls publicly, if you're that confident, you should bet on it. And one thing that I would have put $10,000 on if I had the opportunity was the second Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, I would have put any amount of money that the Republicans are going to push somebody through because that's a Supreme Court pick. In the United States, this is like the cream of the crop of political power.
It happens once a generation.
There is no way that any Republican is like, now, even when I heard those 4 Republican senators come up and they're like, oh, we're going to block. Nah, you're not going to block anything. No way you're going to give up a Supreme Court pick. But people will do whatever they can to secure political power. It's just, how it goes.
Yep, that's true.
So you guys are, Canada has had some of the strictest lockdown stuff in terms of travel. Like in terms of being able to travel anywhere in the world. I've noticed that because I was going to travel again and you can't, nobody can go in or out. But you guys are doing pretty shaky when it comes to like coronavirus stuff. I want to say that your deaths per capita were about half the US, which is...
It ebbs and it flows. There's been some inconsistency on certain political levels. I do get the impression now that at least, one of the big problems is that in Canada, health is a provincial jurisdiction. It's not federal. So the provinces can basically dictate their own policy. And so there wasn't as much of a sort of a unified effort. That's getting a lot better. And we're getting a lot of good advice, both at the federal and provincial levels in terms of what to do with this. You still get stupid idiots that get together, for Halloween parties or whatever kind of thing, and then spread the virus kind of thing. Overall, I think it's going better. The problem is that there's just so much information out there, and you have to pick and choose, what information really reflects. What is the infection rate? What is the lethality rate? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? I'm seeing, worrisome headlines in the local newspaper that, this will be a bad winter. It's already cold. It's like approaching 0 here. So what's that, 32 Fahrenheit? So, winter is coming and, people will be spending a lot more time inside. So I think we are worried about the possibility it might get worse. But on the other hand, there's pockets of the country where it's hardly appearing at all. It's mostly in the big cities. It's like it's the Torontos, it's the Montreals of this world where you're getting a lot of infections because that's where most of the people live. Where I'm living in a small town, you never hear of it. Like, we take precautions, we wear masks, we wash our hands, we keep social distancing, but it simply isn't an issue in a small town where is a big issue in a big city. So it depends on where you are in the country.
I followed you up to that last point. In a lot of rural parts of the U.S., people don't see it, people don't get sick or whatever, but they also don't care about like social distancing or whatever because they don't see it.
Well, yeah. See, I'm in a small town of about 5,000 people, and I can tell you categorically, everybody wears a mask at the grocery store. And everybody practices social distancing. And everybody washes their hands when they go in and they go out. Like, it's rote. You don't even think about it anymore. And we've been doing this now for 9 months. Like, we've had the anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers and that kind of thing, but not nearly to the same extent I think that you guys have had. And no politician has said this is fake, or don't worry about it, or masks don't work, or inject Clorox into your veins or something. That hasn't happened here. That you don't see that happening here.
One thing that I wish was possible in the U.S. is I wish that we could weaponize the extreme amount of like pride and exceptionalism we have in our country to actually do like exceptional things. Like I genuinely do believe that the United States had the capability to be the world leader on coronavirus related stuff. It's really crazy to me when I read about like World War II, how like the country was able to come together in so many amazing ways, as long as you weren't Japanese, and do a whole bunch of like really amazing stuff in terms of like total war effort. But wearing a mask is just too much of an ask for a lot of people that are old and like veterans. Like, that's crazy to me. It blows my mind.
I know. Well, so we just celebrated Remembrance Day on the 11th, right? This is your Memorial Days in May. Ours is basically, I think you call it Armistice Day or something. It's the big holiday here in Canada to recognize the Canadians who died in the wars, kind of thing. And we think back to that, that effort that we all, as you said, we all got together and defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. It took us 6 years, kind of thing, and an atrocious loss of life and damage to property and everything. But we agreed that we had to work to this together, and that's, again, as you said earlier, that's been the alliance that's been carrying us forward for 75 years. And to see what's happened over the past 4 years is really criminal in nature. It was never perfect, and there always are disagreements, but at least we had a common purpose, and a common purpose was democracy. It was freedom of expression. It was freedom of worship. It was, we're going to build these liberal systems. And that's what seems to have been thrown under the bus over the past 4 years by, of all, surprise, surprise, but by, of all people, the one power that kind of held it together for 75 years. And there's no question, you guys have, carried the ball for far too long. A lot of countries, including my own, don't spend nearly enough on defense. We've been freeloaders for a very long time. Most of the European Union's in the exact same boat. But to see the one country that we all looked up to as sort of the one that, when at the end of the day, when you're up against the wall, who could you rely on is the United States? And we told ourselves, I'm not sure I can rely on that anymore. That really hurt.
This is something that I actually get so irritated about when Trump talks about it and other people talk about like NATO or whatever, in terms of like countries freeloading or not meeting their military contribution or whatever. My understanding is NATO wasn't supposed to exist to like just make countries contribute to their military budget. NATO was like an agreement, an alliance. Like the U.S. is basically buying influence by getting people into, this North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Yeah, it's not just supposed to be about having a strong military. There's supposed to be a lot more going on there, a lot more exchange going on there than just military dominance or whatever. And it seems like, at least under Trump, we totally forgot that. Like the obsession became with like countries meeting their mandatory minimum spending under NATO.
The 2%, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, another thing, of course, that has been a major contributor to our ability to maintain the system is intelligence sharing. Mm-hmm. So I come from the intelligence world, right? And the intelligence sharing we've had since the Second World War. I mean, you probably heard of the term the Five Eyes Club. That's the five Anglo powers. Yep. There's nothing like that in the history of the planet. We're 5 countries that are like-minded. We're all Anglophone. We have similar histories, shared intelligence of that nature so freely. Like this is the gold standard. And I'm pretty sure, I retired 5 years ago from the Intelligence Committee, but I'm pretty sure some of my colleagues were questioning themselves. I mean, the Americans really, do they really care about this club anymore? Like, are they going to invest in it? Are they going to keep sharing to the same extent? I'm sure they did. I'm sure it didn't collapse completely, obviously, but a lot of the assumptions that we've had is, I guess, what I'm trying to say here. The assumptions we've been going forward with for 75 years were being questioned in terms of the reliability of the single greatest power in there. And that really, really hurts because this is important stuff.
Yeah.
This is important stuff for all of us to agree that there is not an ideal system. Democracy is not perfect. Liberal economics is not perfect, but it's probably the best we've got. Mm-hmm. And maybe we'll get something better. Was it Churchill said that democracy is the worst system except for everything else? Yeah. So let's keep working on it. But for that whole experiment to be undermined in the way it has let's just hope that those days are behind us and that under the Biden administration, we're going to go back to whatever normal used to be before. This news that I was just listening to before we started, the idea of the vaccine. So it looks optimistic, promising.
Very optimistic compared to what we thought it would be. A lot of people were saying middle next year was optimistic. So, yeah. Yeah,
now we're looking like early 2021, right? So maybe we'll get back to whatever the normal is going to be in the post-COVID period. Who knows what it's going to be. But, I think with the change in administration, with the vaccine, now we can move forward together on the same joint projects with the same goals, knowing that we have an administration in place that at least gets what those questions are and is willing to work with the allies that it's had for the past 75 years.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I wish in the United States, I had this crazy idea that we could have 2 different governments, one for social issues and one for social economic issues, and then one for one for social issues and one for economic issues, and they could just be totally divorced. Because I feel like there are so many issues that we could come together on in the United States if they weren't paired with political issues. Like if wearing a mask didn't mean that you were like some cuck, deep state, Hillary Clinton, devil, Satan worshiper, I feel like everybody in the U.S. would have just done it, like no brainer. I feel like it wouldn't have been a divided issue. Or if we're talking about things like living wage or minimum wage or healthcare, like the fact that these get pegged onto like such hardcore political identities feels so cancerous to the conversation.
Well, it's this freedom issue, right? You've got this notion that these freedoms are somehow, I don't know, they're sacrosanct or they're above criticism or that. So I have the freedom to do what I want means I have the freedom not to wear a mask and infect you. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, you don't. That's not what freedom means. Mm-hmm. Freedom doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want. And my grandfather ends up dying because he's compromised in terms of his immunity system. That's not what my father and my uncles fought for in World War II, for the ability for every asshole to say, I can do whatever I want. I don't give a shit what it does to you because it's my freedom to do so.
Yeah.
That's that's quite the same thing. So I agree with you. It'd be nice if you could sort of divorce that notion of the politics of it, which I think is that political side of freedom versus what is socially responsible to do. And it's socially responsible to wear masks and socially distance and wash your hands and not cough in people's faces and recognize that this is a real thing. This is not some kind of fake thing that Hillary Clinton invented in a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. This stuff is serious.
It's so insane to me that like a parent will have a conversation with their child and scold them for being irresponsible because of like how they're driving, you know, and every kid has heard that speech. It's like, if you're going to be an adult, you're going to have more freedom, but with that freedom comes responsibility. And you need to make sure that just because you have more freedom doesn't mean you can go and goof off it. And then that adult will run out and cough on people and sneeze on people because they don't think they have to wear a mask. And it's like, really? Okay. Okay. Oh man, I'm totally ignorant of this. So questions about this, because I just haven't followed any of it. A boatload of peace treaties and everything, like normalization of relationships between like the UAE and Israel, like all of this stuff has been signed recently, or supposedly signed recently. I haven't followed any of it. Do you have any opinions on any of the, I guess, like some of the new peace treaties that have been signed in the Middle East? Do you think these are positive going forward, or?
It's a mixed bag. So 3 countries so far have signed peace deals with Israel. So there's UAE, as you mentioned, there's Bahrain, which people can't find on a map, and there's Sudan, of all places. So Sudan was recently on the Americans' terrorist sponsor list, got taken off the list because it signed a peace treaty with Israel. So a little bit of politics going on there, right?
Okay.
I think what worries me about these is that they were rushed through. A lot of money exchanged hands, by the way, to convince these countries to do this. And it was seen as a win for the Trump administration. Hey, look at us. We're getting the Arabs and the Jews to talk. Isn't that great? So, and the other thing it did is it basically took the eyeball off what Netanyahu has been doing in Israel ever since he became prime minister. His policies in the West Bank, the expansionist nature of the settlements and things like that. He was able to basically say, well, hey, I've got peace treaties. So obviously the Arabs don't care about the Palestinians anymore because they're signing peace treaties with me. That to me was highly problematic. And look at, I'm not saying that the Palestinians are always right. I forget who said it, was that the Palestinians never miss a chance to miss a chance. And that certainly is largely true of the way they've done their politics over the past 75 years. But I think that, Israeli domestic policy is, they basically have said, we don't really give a rat's ass about the Palestinians. We're not going to sign, we're not going to make any kind of progress in terms of, a Palestinian state. We're going to keep encouraging the encroachment of Jewish settlements into the West Bank so that there'll be facts on the ground whereby there cannot be a Palestinian state because there's no territorial contiguity to create a state. So yes, it's kind of good that states that were formerly, at least on paper, at war with Israel for decades no longer are. But I think this is just a political move to essentially, boost the egos and to boost the chances for re-election of people like Netanyahu and Trump. And then, of course, in the Trump case, it didn't work out. So thank God for that. But I don't put a lot of faith in what all this stuff means. It doesn't mean that you're going to see less terrorism in Israel by Palestinians against Israelis. You're still going to see I don't know if you've been following, but COVID in Israel has been a huge problem. And one of the main reasons for that is the ultra-Orthodox Jews refuse to social distance and they refuse to wear masks. So a lot of the major infection sites in Israel are in these ultra-Orthodox communities. These people are Jewish extremists. And there's a very small wedge of those Jewish extremists who are violent in nature, who will carry out terrorist attacks in the occupied territories against Palestinians. And so, by signing these treaties, you kind of say, well, we don't have to worry about this anymore. Like, why bother talking about a peace treaty? It's no longer necessary. We're going to set that one aside. And the bottom line is you just can't set it aside because this thing has been a festering sore for the better part of 75 years. You just can't sweep it under the carpet because you signed a peace treaty with Bahrain, which people can't find on a map. It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Gotcha. So the 3 countries, because I'm sorry, just because I wasn't right. So you said it was the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan with Israel.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
There's talk the Saudis might as well. If the Saudis do, and I'd be surprised if they did, but stranger things have happened, then you'd see a lot of the other states, maybe Oman would, and maybe Kuwait would, although Kuwait tends to be a little bit independent of their foreign policy. Maybe Qatar, what about Saudis? The Saudis hate the Qataris, so who knows what's going to happen with that. But I think if the Saudis ponied up, I think you'd see a major shift. Again, to what end? I'm not entirely certain.